Welcome back, Untangled Viners. Today we have a great episode with our guest, Tammy Bjelland. She's the founder of Workplaceless, and she's going to walk us through how to navigate the future of work, especially remote and hybrid organizations. Tammy's journey in remote work began in 2011 when she returned to the US from Spain. She was seeking a career that could adapt to wherever she called home. Her first role in EdTech on a hybrid team ignited her passion for remote work and its possibilities. But she recognized the barriers to widespread remote work adoption. And that's why she founded Workplaceless in 2017. Now, today, Workplaceless is a global workforce supporting organizations worldwide in preparing their employees for remote and hybrid work realities. They equipped individuals, managers, and executives to navigate the intricacies of distributed teams from communication to performance management. So, if you're like me and you want to continue to learn about the future of work, join us for this episode where Tammy talks about how Workplaceless is pioneering and reshaping the way we work and live. You don't want to miss this episode, so let's go ahead and get started. Hey everyone, welcome back to Untangled Vines, redefining the rules of work. Today we have a special guest here, Tammy Bjelland. She is from Workplaceless. And I wanted to get her on here because she is one of the pioneers of the future of work. And I really like what she's doing with Workplaceless. So Tammy, thank you for being here and thank you for being a part of this community.
Thanks so much for having me, Zach.
All right. So I'm just going to go ahead and dive into it. I want to talk about how you and Workplaceless helps companies successfully shift to working asynchronously. So first is, what does that mean specifically to someone who might not have an understanding of that term? And then if you can follow that up with how you help clients achieve this with your company, Workplaceless.
Sure. Yeah. So asynchronous work is based on the concept of asynchronous communication. So there's many ways to categorize types of communication, but one way is to differentiate async communication from synchronous or sync communication. So synchronous communication is anything that happens at the same time. So think of real time conversations, think of phone conversations, Zoom calls, even the conversation between you and I right now is a synchronous conversation. Asynchronous is any communication where there's a delay between the message being received and then the response to that message. So in its true form, email is asynchronous, and you have messaging is also asynchronous. You send a text to somebody, there's a delay before they respond. So the concept of asynchronous work is the idea that you should think of how much work you can accomplish using asynchronous methods instead of always relying on synchronous methods. So the danger of overly relying on synchronous communication is you get burnout, you have overly scheduled calendars, so you have back-to-back meetings, you can't make a decision without having a meeting, you really rely on access to other people for information. So I have to call my boss, or I have to check in with my boss to get this information that I need to move forward. So it's reliance on other people and their time in order to move work forward. And so working asynchronously is really about shifting the balance of sync and async communication so that it is more harmonious and you're optimizing for maximum productivity and efficiency while also reserving time for the connection that comes from synchronous communication. So we work with clients to encourage an async first approach to communication, which does not mean async only. So we're not saying that you should only message people on Slack forever and ever, and you should never meet with your team. That is not what we mean by async first. What we mean by async first is that the default method of communication is async because it allows for greater inclusion. It allows for greater productivity, and to accomplish as much as you can async and reserving synchronous time for moments that really matter.
That makes sense. I used to work at a company called Kumu. They were a enterprise video solution. So we heavily focused on video, asynchronous video. So we would record a video, we would send it out to teammates, and then that's how they would do it, which helped us among the time zones, people in different countries, and that kind of stuff. What made you want to focus on, and correct me if I'm wrong, but what made you want to focus on that being a portion of what you offer to companies and training them on how to become asynchronous?
Yeah, so Workplaceless started in 2017 as with a mission to improve access to remote work, to sustainable remote work by helping companies create more remote roles and also helping job seekers and employees do better or perform and thrive in remote roles. So we were really focused on location independence. And as companies have become more comfortable in adopting remote work, they're expanding their talent pools. And as they expand their talent pools, those pools now cross time zones. So companies that previously had not had to worry about time zones and figuring out, calendar overlapping and all of that, they were learning that they could access the top talent all over the world, but they were really struggling with figuring out how to collaborate effectively with those team members in a way that did not contribute to overworking and burnout. And so those companies are now seeing that asynchronous first work, communication, and collaboration is the best way forward because you can still tap into this global talent pool. You can still move work forward, and you don't have to make sure that, some people are getting up for meetings at 4 a.m. and some people are, staying awake until 11 p.m. to join meetings. So async first is really a continuation of remote work because it allows for truly autonomous work. And that's really what location flexibility is about. It's what schedule flexibility is about. And so that has, we always talked about asynchronous communication, but as remote work has become more mainstream and hybrid work has become more mainstream, an async first approach is becoming more visible as a strategy for managing really truly dispersed teams across regions and time zones.
Yeah, and I've seen a lot of data out there, articles. I'm sure you've seen it as well, where a lot of companies are going hybrid, and that asynchronous with the hybrid, I'm sure benefits everybody, because you're able to communicate and stay on the same path as everyone without having to interrupt people's days sometimes and the time zones again. But I think it can segue into like the three topics that I really want to talk to you about today related to your workplaceless company. And one is on the topic of async, but more so finding asynchronous balance as a company, maybe as an individual too, or employee, eliminating inefficient meetings. And then you've talked about it several times already, which is reducing team burnout, specifically for remote and hybrid teams. So what does async balance mean, and how do you find that as a company, as a team, or as an individual?
Yeah, so balance means that you have enough that you're focusing on accomplishing tasks in the most efficient and effective way possible. And it really depends on the purpose of what you're trying to accomplish. So we developed a framework called the Placeless Taxonomy, which is really helpful in seeing how you can incorporate more asynchronous practices into your work. And so that taxonomy classifies different communication objectives according to how difficult they are to achieve asynchronously. So at the bottom of the taxonomy, you have informing. So that's the easiest thing to accomplish async. So we recommend clients and anybody that is looking to improve balance between async and sync to look at any work tasks that they have right now in meetings that really are the purpose is to inform. So stand up meetings, update meetings, presentations, anything that's informing, those meetings can easily be transitioned to an async or even blended process. You move up the taxonomy up to the very top, and connecting is the most challenging task to accomplish asynchronously. So what happens when your calendar is chock full of, meetings that could have been an email? You don't have time for meetings that are actually valuable, where you're developing meaningful relationships with colleagues, with other people in the organization to develop your social capital. So the Placeless taxonomy presents a way to really audit your current schedule and what your individual as well as team calendar consists of, and identifying any kind of meeting or synchronous event on the calendar, and identifying those for transition to an async or blended approach. So that's how we suggest finding more balance is finding those tasks that you're currently accomplishing synchronously and identifying any of those that could easily be changed to async.
Do you, within that taxonomy, I can't say the word taxonomy.
Taxonomy, it's a, yeah.
It's probably just me. Do you have criteria that you help companies think about whenever they're going through that meeting list, or a checklist to say, okay, or a balanced scorecard? This could be asynchronous. This should be synchronous. Do you guys have that by chance?
Well, so the taxonomy serves as that, right? So
Okay.
it has, examples of meetings that you might be having that you're really just only doing synchronously, and suggesting
Mhm.
ways that you can shift that. So in our lead Placeless course and our hybrid team success toolkit, there is a template for making a decision-making process blended. So decision-making is one of those tasks that most organizations, they rely a lot on synchronous time. We all
Mhm.
have to get together and make a decision, and we all have to, find consensus. And so we provide frameworks for examples of how you can shift some of these more commonly, synchronous tasks and shift them to async. So we provide that blueprint and examples. But that individual, that very unique balance is going to look very different from individual to individual. And it's also going to look different from team to team and organization to organization. So I reiterate that it's not about async only.
Mhm.
There are times that your team is going to really benefit from synchronous communication, and there are times when it can just be an email.
Yeah.
And so it really does take constant exploration and experimentation with different types of work, and that really is on leadership to take that on and to introduce this new way of working as something that they are actively investing resources and time in seeing what is the perfect balance for them.
Have you, because in my experience, especially whenever I was working at Kumu and we were a 100% remote organization, and we might have this experience at Grapevine too, people who are used to being in the office and being a leader in that way, have you seen pushback from people whenever you're saying, like, it would probably be easier just to send a 2-minute video to the team instead of hold a 30-minute to an hour conversation? Have you seen that pushback, and
Oh,
how do
there's
you
so much
handle
pushback.
that?
There's so much pushback. When you change anything about the way people have been doing things, there's always pushback.
Yeah.
Even among the most open-minded and forward-thinking leaders, and it's true, you can still work synchronously and still just rely primarily on synchronous meetings. And that does get the job done. But when you think
Yeah.
about the ways that people really want to work and the flexibility that is really in demand by
Mhm.
employees, and just the changing ways of the economic landscape. Um, the companies that truly embrace new ways of working are the ones that are going to thrive, not just in the short term, but in the very long term. And so there's definitely pushback, but that's why it does take constant reinforcement and motivation. And again, that's partly on leaders, but also individual contributors participate in that process as well. Modeling new behaviors, trying new things, demonstrating a learning mindset and failing and sharing those failures and learning from them. I mean, we're all in this together. And especially when teams move forward and adopting a new way of working, it is really important to have that psychological safety to admit to one another when some things haven't worked or how you might be able to improve. So
Mhm.
yes, definitely push back, but there's, that pot of gold at the end of that rainbow that you're just, all trying to find. And that's like that perfect harmonious balance of sync and async, where you feel connected to team members and you feel connected to the mission and the company, but you also have plenty of time to do deep work and focus and actually get your work done without running from meeting to meeting.
Nice. Yeah, and it sounds like that's what you and Workplaceless helps other organizations find. But speaking of meetings and running back to forth, I know that I've been there. There was one time where I had 16 meetings on my schedule in one day because I was coaching people, and I barely had time to run to the restroom and come back. So I love what you're doing.
I mean,
And
it resonates. Everyone's had a day like that. And even if you're not running from like a physical conference room to another conference room, it's really exhausting.
yeah.
And really the ability to just add a calendar or add an invite to somebody's calendar and add another virtual meeting onto somebody's calendar, it's really exacerbated the issue where, I think that when everybody was in the office, I think people were a little bit more. Maybe I'm, maybe I have rose-colored glasses about the past, but I do feel like it was if because there was more friction in setting
Mhm.
those meetings, you didn't have quite the overload that you have now.
Yeah, and plus you had to make sure that a conference room was available and that kind of
Yeah,
stuff.
yeah. I mean,
Um,
talk about friction, space availability.
uh, but speaking of meetings, because this is one of the things that I wanted to ask you too is like you've already mentioned, everybody talks about meetings that could have been an email or that they were just a waste of time. Like people walk out of the meetings and they don't feel like anything was gained from it. How do you approach meetings that make them more efficient and more effective using your methodology at Workplaceless?
Yeah, so back to the placeless taxonomy. So the if you think about a meeting, they all should have a purpose, right? First
Yes,
and foremost. So
100%.
so before scheduling a meeting, we suggest, thinking about what you actually want to accomplish. Do you
Hmm.
want to get together and team build? Because that's a purpose.
Yep.
Or are you all getting together because you want to brainstorm an idea? Are you getting together? Like you need to think about what the actual objective is and then what is the outcome, like what is that tangible evidence that you can present at the end of a meeting that says we accomplished our objective.
Hmm.
And so that's the first thing. And if you do that and you realize, oh, this doesn't need to be a meeting because I just did the work of the meeting, then great, you've saved people, time on their calendar. After that, so if you've identified the objective. So from there, look at the placeless taxonomy and see, how difficult is this to achieve async? So if it's the objective is to inform, you're like, okay, I can send an email, I can send a recorded video, I can, just send a quick message on Slack. Um, if it's collaborating, so there's a defined outcome for, like, let's say, Zach, you and I wanted to come up with an outline for the next podcast episode for instance. There's a very clear outcome for that, and you can start async by creating the framework to contribute input asynchronously, and then scheduling an optional synchronous meeting to maybe have a conversation, go more into depth about certain topics, and decide on a way forward. So that is an example of a meeting, right? A potential meeting, but with asynchronous components as part of that process. So you're accomplishing the objective without having as much synchronous time required. So that's the process that we recommend, is thinking about the objective first, the outcome, and then determining what elements can be done async.
And do you have any tips? Because whenever I'm hearing that, it's always, I think people start with good intentions whenever it comes to meetings, but then it kind of, we talk about getting bogged down, and there's meeting after meeting after meeting. And then you feel like you don't have time to set objectives or clear goals and things like that. Do you have a tip for any executive or leader out there, or anybody scheduling meetings, on how to like take a deep breath? And it might go back to auditing your meetings and making sure that, okay, does this have to be synchronous? Can it be asynchronous? Can we collaborate asynchronously, and then have a quick synchronous, maybe 10 minutes instead of 30 minutes? But do you have any tips on anybody, like the people who are bogged down in their time, that maybe they're not good at time management and they just feel like they can't set that objective before the meeting? Any tips on that?
Ooh, yeah, you should not be scheduling meetings if you don't have that skill set. That would be my first thing. And that, it
That's
sounds
true.
harsh, but I do think that anyone that like has the authority to put a meeting on anybody's calendar, if they don't know how to set an objective ahead of time, that authority should be taken away post haste.
Hmm.
But so in all seriousness, though, like additional tips for people who just feel bogged down. Number one, if you don't have authority over like scheduling meetings and you're just being invited to meetings, decline meetings that don't require your full participation. Decline meetings that don't have agendas. So if it's not clear what you're doing there, just decline the meeting and
Hmm.
say in your response, I'm declining this meeting because it's not clear what my active participation would be, or it's not clear why I'm being invited. So in many organizations, there's not really a culture of using an agenda in every meeting, but
Yeah.
that really is on everybody to enforce. Right. So in some organizations, there's a policy: if there's no meeting agenda, no attenda, right? Like
Yeah. Yeah.
no, no,
Yeah.
it's not required to attend any meeting without an agenda. In an organization that doesn't have that policy, you probably have to be a little bit more subtle, or just, not quite as uh, abrupt
Yeah.
in that kind of deciding when you go to a meeting or not. But it is absolutely worthwhile to make those suggestions, because that's how you begin to have that culture of relying on agendas and thinking about what the actual objective is. um, Leaving meetings on time. So,
Yeah.
if the meeting ends at 10 till, leave at 10 till and say, sorry, I have a hard stop. I need to take these. You don't even have to explain it. The meeting ends at
Yeah.
this time, right? No explanation needed. Bye. Um, and so that's just like calendar, figuring out what you can do to find some time and find some, calm in the midst of all the chaos. Then, in terms of people organizing meetings, scheduling meetings a little bit shorter. So making sure that they end at,
Mm.
the 10-minute mark, or 10 till, right? Or scheduling 15-minute meetings. Like, try scheduling meetings that are shorter so that you don't fill up time that you don't actually have to fill up. Use time before and after meetings to do
Mm.
all of that administrative work of making sure that everything is documented, making sure that people have access to everything that they need, assigning pre-work. So making sure that that people come to the meetings prepared, which again is part of culture, right? If you have a
Yeah.
culture where people are used to just showing up to a meeting and not having done any preparation, that's not going to change overnight. But that is, again, in leadership's purview to change. So
Mm.
schedule a meeting that requires pre-work where you do a reading of, the update of last week, and you come ready with solutions to the challenges that were presented in that update, right? So assigning pre-work, holding people accountable to completing that pre-work, then assigning tasks based on that discussion and making sure that those tasks are always in the same place. So if you have a project management tool, we use
Mhm.
ClickUp, for instance. So at the
Yep.
end of every meeting, make sure that every single task that is decided on or every single action item is transferred over to ClickUp and has an assignee and a due date. Um, so I just rambled off a lot of things. So hopefully
No,
that
that was
answered
great.
some of your questions.
No, I'm gonna have to listen back to it because there were so many tips that I think are 100% beneficial to anybody in office, remote, hybrid. It doesn't matter in this case. Like I love that because I'm a big agenda person. Like each meeting that I have, I like to have an agenda so people know what the purpose of the meeting is, and then they can come into the meeting like yes, we'll still have a conversation at the beginning, so we're showing emotional intelligence and we're not just being rude, but then we get straight to it. And like you said, if you shorten that time on the meeting, what's funny is if you give a person an hour to have a meeting, they're going to take an hour. If you give them 30 minutes, they're going to take 30 minutes. If you give them 15, they're going to take 15. And you still get the same amount done. It's just that time constraint is kind of psychological in a sense, but you're still able to get that done. So, no, that was not rambling. That was amazing. I love that. I'm a nerd, so that's okay. Um, now this might, I don't know if this is a segue or not, but the next thing I wanted to ask you is about burnout. I feel like we've constantly seen, especially with the transition to remote work, I've seen so many people talk about burnout, tons of articles saying that remote work can increase burnout. One, do you think that that's true? And then two, do you have any specific ways to prevent burnout for an individual or from a team perspective?
Yeah, I absolutely think it can be true, especially if somebody works for an organization that has not established or has not built a culture that believes in boundaries.
Hmm.
And that, or a culture that really rewards um, ultra responsiveness, always being on, that rewards overworking, right? So if you have a culture that rewards all of those things, you're going to have people who overwork and they're going to get burned out. It's easier to do that in remote work because there's no physical distinction between your home life and your physical life.
Hmm.
So, most people sleep in their homes, right?
Yeah.
They don't sleep in their, in the office, at headquarters.
Unless you're
So,
Elon Musk.
oh yeah, I mean, that's
That's a
different
different topic. We
podcast.
won't go there.
um, yeah, so it's easier to overwork in remote work because it is like your work is right there. It's right,
Hmm.
you hear a ping come through and you're cooking dinner and you're like, oh, I'm just gonna go check on that or I'm gonna go do that, and then
Yep.
20 minutes later you've burnt your dinner. Um, and so it's really easy to do that. And I think, beyond just remote work, it's like the access that we have to communication tools, right?
Hmm.
We can always be connected at all times, and that has translated into we have to be connected at all times when it comes to work. And so really it's a mindset shift. um, you know Individuals can absolutely set really clear boundaries. What they can't do is force their colleagues and their boss and their boss's boss to comply with those boundaries.
Hmm.
And that's where the team agreement and the leadership commitment to respecting those boundaries comes in. Because, I can set a boundary, and if my boss is like, you need to be able to be available, on Sunday when I have scheduled time with my family, um, and that's an expectation for me, like I don't have many other options, right?
Yeah.
I either do what the boss says, or, potentially I could, be penalized for that, whether that's, loss of privileges, loss of a job.
Hmm.
Um, and so it really is, a joint effort when it comes to establishing boundaries and respecting those boundaries. And leaders can make a huge difference in that, not just by like respecting their team members' boundaries, but also modeling effective boundaries and saying, I'm going to be offline,
Yeah.
after work and not sending emails, you know. That said, the beauty of async work is, work when works best for you. And for some people, they are night owls and they want to work at night. So there's a little bit of a balance there. But that's where really honest, transparent discussions among team members is really beneficial, because there needs to be an explicit recognition that just because somebody is sending a message at a certain time does not mean they expect an immediate reply. And that is very hard to get over, right? We are
Hmm.
we are conditioned to use asynchronous tools synchronously. Like,
That's true. Yeah. I've experienced that. And the thing that I want to call out there is it's a combination of the individual's boundaries and the culture and the leadership that is being driven throughout that company. And for example, you can have the best intentions, but if you don't follow through with action, it's not going to come through as what you're actually wanting to do. For example, we had no meeting Fridays, and that was supposed to be so we can kind of like disconnect from Zoom fatigue and all that kind of stuff. But what happened was, one, um, we started off good, we started off strong, but then we saw kind of like the asynchronous communication rise. Instead of having Zoom meetings, we started slacking everybody more on those days, or just those types of things that happen. And so I never really felt like I could have a no meeting Friday, where I'm just focusing on certain things. But then also, it always felt like we had so much to do. And this was more internal. Like, I would spread out the meetings and actually have meetings on Friday, so I didn't have to have so many Monday through Thursday. Um, so I don't know where that's going, but that's just
well,
my
that's interesting because it's not just about figuring out that balance of sync and async. It's also making sure that your team members have access to the information that they need so that they don't rely on other people, right?
yeah.
So, and that is part of the same, approach or methodology when it comes to work. But it is a different sort of conversation because you're talking about like documentation and a single source of truth, and really documenting everything so that it is
Hmm.
readily available to anybody that might need it.
Yeah, and this is not a selfish plug, but that's what we're building Grapevine. That'll
Hmm.
kind of solve that problem. Fingers crossed if everything goes well. But this is not about that. um, so one of the other things that I wanted to talk about with you are some cool things that you have on Workplaceless, the website, and what you offer to the people that you work with. One is the Workplaceless Remote Work Competency Model, and then the remote career stages. And I think like this kind of segues somewhat smoothly because we're talking about the leadership and the culture of the company, and you have to be able to know how to manage people in a remote environment. So can you tell us the career stages that you've defined in the remote career stages, and then how can someone progress through these stages to reach a remote executive level?
Yeah, so the remote work competency model defines the competencies, so the skills, attitudes, behaviors that are required to succeed in a remote role. And the competency model is organized into strands. So you have digital proficiency and communication, you have culture and growth, and then you have like performing work, like how does the work get done? And then it's also organized according to career stage. So you have a remote worker, so somebody who just does work remotely. So that's usually an individual contributor who's assigned tasks to complete, and they can work independently. Then you have a remote team member. So that's somebody if you are on a team as an individual contributor, but you have coworkers that you need to collaborate with, and you have, a manager or a supervisor that you also work with. Then you have remote leader. So that's anybody who manages anybody that works remotely. So the manager might actually not be remote. They might be in an office, but they manage at least one remote employee.
Mhm.
Of course, that also includes, remote managers who actually are remote who are also managing remote employees. And then after that, you have remote executive. And so that is anybody who is driving the strategy and vision for remote work in a team or organization. So if you drive that strategy, you are what we consider a remote executive. So you need to be
Mhm.
able to, manage change, develop that vision, develop that strategy, make them compelling, generate buy-in, and allocate the resources, evaluate resources that you need to move that vision forward, and then effectively delegate, any kind of tasks that are required to achieve that vision.
Okay. Yeah, I like the way that y'all define that because we're kind of tapping into. I mean, even though you started in 2017, you were ahead of the curve with Workplaceless. But now you're giving other companies and organizations a framework that they can leverage for their organization and their employees and the skills that they need to be successful in a remote and hybrid working model. So that's why I wanted to call that out, and we'll put Workplaceless website in the show notes so people can go and check it out. But I'm going to continue here because I know that we're running a little bit close to time. But there was an article on your website about communications charter. One, can you tell us what that is and why do companies, especially remote and hybrid teams, need something like a communication charter?
Yeah, communication charter is a team agreement that documents all of the channels that you use for communication. So think of anything that you use right now. So you could use Slack, Zoom. Again, we use ClickUp for project management where we communicate. There's also like collaboration documents where you communicate via comments. There's email. Can't forget about email. And so, those are just some platforms. So most teams use way more than just five, the five that I've listed. And it gets very confusing what channel or what platform you are supposed to use for different types of communication. And there's very different expectations for response time as well as for context that you need to give in that type of communication. So a communication charter is a really helpful working agreement that helps teams understand when they have a message that they want to convey, what's the best platform to use for that, and then
Mm-hmm.
how to structure your message in a way that everyone understands its priority level and what it's concerning, right? So the first step in developing that agreement is thinking about the types of messages that you send, right? So, what is an urgent message? And that's different for every team. Like teams that are dealing with like life and death situations,
Oh yeah.
urgent means something really different for them than it means for like a software dev team, right?
Yeah.
And so, but that team needs to define what urgent means, and they need to define what the response expectations are, or what the expectations are for even communicating that urgency. So, like in our team, for instance, like we do training and development, like no life or death situations, like, but urgent for us means that something needs to, we need a response right away.
Mhm.
Right. And an example is like, let's say we have a live workshop with a client and there's no Zoom meeting or no Zoom link. Like that's urgent. It's
Mm.
coming up right now. This would never happen. But you know, as an example, like the link isn't working or, got deleted or something like that.
Mhm.
So that's urgent. So what does that mean? So it means that the expectation is that the owner of whatever, that particular issue is, they need to respond immediately. Um,
Mhm.
in our team, urgent messages are sent through Slack, and you write urgent in the message so that, it's very clear. Um, and you have to give, all the context
Mhm.
that the person needs to solve the problem. Now, that looks different for every team. And so you have to go through the work of saying, this is an urgent message. Urgent messages, you should only be calling me for urgent messages. I never want to get a
Mhm.
phone call about, you know, a typo on the website, right?
Yeah.
Um, but though that those expectations need to be explicit and they need to be documented so that everyone actually is able to interpret them the same way. Miscommunication and mistakes happen because everyone has very different interpretations of what expectations are. And
Mhm.
a communication document or communication charter can really help minimize miscommunications and really costly mistakes.
Yeah, I'm a big believer in clear communication, alignment of the team, and clear expectations. And I think that's where a lot of companies are falling short on whenever they're working in a remote environment, is because you have to be intentional whenever you're in a remote organization. And that communication charter is one of the specific ways that you can be intentional, where, like, going back to, I keep talking about Kumu, that's the last place that I worked, but we had Slack channels, and then we had so many channels, then we also had emails, and some people liked emails, some people liked Slack. We never really defined what this specific channel is for, and then when do we use email, when do we use that, and that communications charter would have really cleared that up and made it a lot more seamless, and we would have all been more aligned. I
Yeah.
love Kumu, just FYI. They're a
Well,
great culture.
the reason that this exists is because, I encountered that in my own, past jobs. And it's not saying that those experiences were, on the whole negative, but our past experiences inform, the things that we would want to do better. And
Exactly.
and that's great. And communications charter, I had never encountered that in any organization that I had been in. Are you kidding me? It was like, no, I was getting the same messages over and over again from, like, it was the same thing from Slack to email. And then,
Yeah.
I would just sometimes, oh my gosh, I have a horrible story about how I was interviewing with this company and I got randomly added to like these text chains, like randomly,
Oh.
like the person, the, decision maker just like included me on like a text chain with a random group of people, didn't introduce me to anybody, didn't like, I had no idea what the heck was going on.
Oh no.
And so that's like a worst case scenario. Like I wasn't even part of the team, but I knew, I was like, this is a red flag. I have
That's
no
a security
interest.
risk.
Yeah, I was like, what is going on? I don't even know these people. Like, and
Oh
I was
man.
getting messages at all hours. I was like, this is a red flag. So,
Yeah.
so now
So
knowing what like a communication charter can do and what it looks like, it's like, now that we all know better, it's like, oh, I
yeah.
can, I can, I can see those red flags from a mile away.
Yeah. Well, I know for Grapevine we're definitely going to have that, because it's almost like a non-negotiable, especially a remote and hybrid. Okay, so I know you only have a little bit more time. Um, we are going to have a lightning round.
Oh,
Are you
I'm
prepared?
excited. Ever since you said that at the beginning, I was like, okay, I wonder what these questions are going
Yeah.
to be.
Speaking of communication, I didn't tell you this was going to happen,
No, but
but I
that,
want.
but the purpose was surprise, right?
Exactly, exactly.
So it's
Okay,
fine.
so I have 9 questions if we can get through all of them.
Okay.
They're pretty simple on some of them. Some of them you might want to extend an answer, but okay. So, coffee or tea for early morning Zoom meetings?
Coffee.
Yes, again. I mean, there's no right or wrong answer, but that's what I would have chose. I got to work on this lightning round. Okay. Favorite remote list or playlist or music genre?
Um, Country.
Oh, okay. I'm not a huge country fan. Uh, old
Wrong
school
answer.
country.
No, I'm just kidding.
I'm rap and hip hop, but and
Okay.
Hamilton. I
Oh,
mean,
interesting.
you can't go
Um,
wrong with that.
for working, I really like listening to the Succession soundtrack.
Oh, really? I haven't tried that.
Yeah.
I'll have to try that.
Okay. It's like if I'm
Get
really
you in the
intense, like
zone.
I really want to think that I'm like a really powerful person, then I listen to Succession, but not a
Oh,
terrible person because everyone in Succession
that's
is
right.
terrible.
Yeah, no spoilers, but yes,
Yeah,
they are terrible.
they are.
Okay. Most creative location you've worked from remotely.
My office right here.
Okay. So when you say like creative, you're saying like get the juices flowing
Yep.
or okay, nice. I would say the same. Okay. One essential tool or app for remote productivity.
Essential tool or app for remote productivity, a timer.
Okay. I like that. Going old school there.
Yep.
I was thinking you were going to say ClickUp or something like that. Uh,
I would say category of tools for that, but no, like a timer.
okay. All right. Next, how do you combat Zoom fatigue or Teams fatigue? Not to leave some people out.
Cancel all my meetings.
There you go. There you go. I like.
I
It's so
I
funny.
can do that though. No,
It's
but
so funny. Like I was
a
just gonna
serious
say, uh, like whenever you cancel the meetings, you realize that sometimes you didn't need to have them. I kind of find that funny.
yeah, that's so true. But if it's already scheduled, if it's that day and I have back-to-back meetings, then going for a walk outside in between.
I like. Yeah, I like that. It clears your mind. It gets you ready to go,
Yeah.
rejuvenated. Okay, name one unexpected benefit of remote work for you. Unexpected.
Better sleep.
What? Why do you think that is?
So I haven't used an alarm clock in years,
Really?
and
I
I
still
think it's
haven't got there.
yeah, so I have really bad anxiety and, insomnia. And so as soon as I set an alarm, I can't sleep because
Oh
I'm
yeah, I know what you're saying.
constantly thinking about how much time I have left to sleep and it like
Oh yeah.
how long it's taken me to go to sleep. So by not setting an alarm, like I fall asleep a lot easier, and it's just totally a
Hmm.
mind thing. But because I work remotely, and naturally my body just wakes up by 7.
Yeah.
Unless I have a super early meeting, it's never been a problem where I've like slept too late.
That makes sense. I told you in a LinkedIn comment, I have anxiety and depression, and I've never thought about that. But like, because I wake up at 5 in the morning, and so like, I'm thinking about it, and I probably don't get as good as sleep because it's there. Um,
You have to wake up
okay.
at 5, or that's just something you like?
Well, I like to because it fits my routine. I like to
Mm,
work out in the early morning. I like to read. So these are things that like if I waited towards the end of the day or the middle of the day, they wouldn't get done.
yeah.
And so for me, it's just it's a mental health exercise for me. But then it also helps me go to sleep earlier too. So it's kind of a
Oh,
combination of
true.
both.
Yeah.
Okay, this one I want to hear what you say because this might be a constant question that I ask everybody. Remote work pet peeve. What drives you crazy?
Um, I hate when people take video calls in their car.
Yeah, I get it. Like they're being helpful, they're on that camera, but
Oh,
I
it
understand.
drives me nuts. It drives me absolutely nuts. I'm like, I would rather not have this meeting or reschedule.
You
It's
just feel like they're
distracting.
not. Yeah, they're
Just
not
it's
there.
distracting for me. It has to be distracting for them. It just
You're
and
worried about them.
people like look terrible. Like I just don't want.
That's true.
I
They get
don't
that
want it.
angle. The
Yeah,
angle is like terrible.
it's
That's a good answer.
terrible. So yeah, that's a pet peeve.
Okay, describe your dream virtual team building activity.
Hmm.
And I don't know. I couldn't think of one. I mean,
Oh, that's
obviously they're
hard.
there. I know.
Virtual team building. Well, so it's one that I've done before.
Okay.
It was really fun. So we did this activity with a group called Marco Experiences,
Hmm.
and it was all about music and like
Oh, I like
different
that.
types of music. We did it for a team building exercise as a team, and we actually wrote a Workplaceless blues song together,
Ooh,
and it was a
that's
really
pretty
cool
cool.
experience.
Did you record it
It is
after
recorded. We have it somewhere.
the song?
Yeah.
Oh, we might have to pull that from the archives. um, okay, last one. Share a quick tip for staying motivated while working remotely,
A quick tip for staying motivated.
or any
Um,
tip.
yeah, pick one thing that if you accomplished it by the end of today, you would feel really proud of yourself.
I like that.
And it would make you feel really good about accomplishing and just do that one thing.
That's very good. It's something that I'm learning now. Like I always have like my weekly plans that
Oh,
I
that's pretty.
yeah, I could send you the template. It's in Canva.
That's
Um, but I always start with that. Like, what are the goals that I want to achieve for the week? And then I break them down into, okay, Monday, I need to make sure that I want to accomplish this. Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday. And as long as I achieve that, then I know that I did something. I got 1% better.
mm-hmm.
And so I think that's a very good tip. And you don't get overwhelmed from
Yeah.
trying to do 10,000 things. Um, so
Yeah, and
that's it.
I've often found like when I feel like crummy at the end of the day, it's often because I'm procrastinating on like this one big thing and I'm like, "Oh
Yeah.
man, I still didn't get to that thing." And so if I'm really struggling with motivation, I really do think to myself, I'm like, if I really could only get one of these things done, like what is the thing that would make me feel at the end of the day like I
Mm,
earned my
yeah.
relaxation, right? I earned
That's
my
nice.
time to just chill.
Yeah, I need to add that element to it because mine is more of a to do, not a
Mm.
how would I feel if I accomplish this. So I like that. Well, that's it. You were the first one to go through the right lightning round, and you
Oh, I liked
passed.
it. I don't know if I was like
Um,
very lightning. I felt like
I know every
sounded.
podcast that I listen to, they say lightning round, and then it's like 30 minutes. But I think we got through quicker than that, so that's good.
Yeah.
Um, but thank you so much for coming on. There was a lot to digest, and I think the listeners are gonna love this. And just thank you for what you're doing at Workplaceless and for pioneering the future of work. So thanks for being here.
Thanks so much for having me.
All right. Thanks, everyone.
Bye.